This will break you. Let's not sugarcoat it. This season, this loss, this betrayal, this disappointment. It will break you. Not gently, not quietly, but deeply and loudly with splinters that get into your soul. It'll feel like your heart forgot how to beat and your breath doesn't know how to find its rhythm. The people you trusted may let you down. The dreams you held so close might unravel right before your eyes, and the person staring back at you in the mirror might start to look like a stranger. But here's what I know. You are broken beyond repair. You are being broken open, and that it is where the light gets in. When life throws its most devastating blows, it rarely gives a warning. It doesn't come knocking gently or whispering politely. It crashes in like a storm, uninvited and merciless, turning the familiar into fragments and the certain into chaos. We all face that moment sooner or later. Then that feels like the ground has disappeared beneath our feet, the one where we can barely breathe, the one that leaves us wondering who or whether we'll ever feel whole again. That is the breaking point. It may come through loss, betrayal, failure, or even the quiet loneliness of feeling unseen. And when it hits, it hurts. It strips you of identities you've clung to, the plans you've carefully built, the dreams you were counting on. There's a silence in that space that can be unbearable, a silence that echoes with doubt, with pain, with fear. And yet, within that silence, something else exists too. A stillness, a pause, a crack in the rhythm of life that holds something sacred. Because in the very moment you feel most shattered, something deeper begins to stir. Something ancient and resilient, something that knows how to rebuild not by going back to who you were, but by moving forward into who or what is need to become. The world will try to convince you that being broken is the end, that failure is final, that pain is punishment. But the truth is, the breaking point is often the exact place where transformation begins. You see, there's a strange paradox to pain. It exposes your fragility and your strength all at once. When you are stripped of everything you defined you begin to see what's real. What lasts? What lives underneath the surface of your roles, your accomplishments, your reputation? It's not weakness that gets revealed when you fall apart. It's truth. It's rawness. It's your humanity. The pressure to hold it together is exhausting. We've been taught to associate strength with stoicism, with endurance, with smiling through the H. But real strength is messier than that. Real strength is in the breakdown, in the tears that refuse to be silenced. Idle moment you admit, I don't know how to do this, and still find the courage to show up anyway. Strength is not about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go of old expectations, of outdated beliefs, of the image you worked so hard to maintain. When everything falls apart, what's left is the truth, and the truth is always the most powerful foundation to rebuild on. It's in that breaking where we finally stop pretending. We stop editing ourselves for approval. We stop shrinking for acceptance. We stop trying to be everything for everyone and start discovering who we are when there's nothing left to prove. The pain becomes the fire that burns away the inessential. It refines you. It clears the clutter of your life and your mind and leaves only what is essential. Your values, your vision, the part of you that knows you are still worthy, even when you've lost, especially when you've lost. Most people are afraid of being broken because they think it's the same as being weak. But the truth is, the people who are the most broken open the ones who live the most authentically. They don't walk through the world hiding behind masks. They don't fake their way through connection. They know what it feels like to lose everything. And so they love deeper. They listen harder. They show up with more compassion. And most of all, they know how to begin again. That moment of breaking isn't an end. It's of initiation. It's the start of a deeper journey, a more honest story. It's where the ego loosens its grip, where pride takes a back seat, where your heart finally has the space gets truth. There's power in that rawness. There's clarity in that chaos. And slowly, without even realizing it, you begin to pick up the pieces, but not to recreate what was, to create something new, something stronger, something more aligned with who you really are. No one ever says it out loud, but the people you admire most, the ones who walk through life with wisdom and depth and courage, they didn't get there without being broken first. They got there because they allowed the breaking to teach them. They allowed the darkness to shape them. They trusted the process even when it made no sense. They stayed in the discomfort long enough to uncover a deeper kind of strength, one not based in avoidance or control, but in surrender, in openness, in truth. There will be moments when you feel like drowning your own pain, when you wonder if it's even worth it to keep going, when nothing makes sense and hope feels like a foreign language. But that moment, that lowest point, is where something begins to awaken inside of you. The part of you that refuses to quit. The part of you that believes, even faintly, that life still has more for you. The part of you that knows this isn't where story ends. Something stirs in the ashes. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It says, you're still here, and somehow you are, not because you avoided being broken, but because you were, and you stayed. We live in a world that praises perfection and punishes transparency. From an early age, we're taught to keep our struggles hidden, to smile even when we're hurting, and to present a curated version of ourselves that feels safe, acceptable, and polished. Vulnerability is labeled as weak, messy, or dangerous. We're warned that if we expose too much of our hearts, We'll be judged, misunderstood, or rejected. So we learn to armor up, to build walls, to suppress emotion, to pretend that everything is fine, even when we're breaking inside. And yet, the paradox is this: vulnerability isn't weakness. It is the most courageous thing we will ever do. Choosing to be vulnerable, truly, deeply vulnerable, is a radical act of bravery in a culture that values control over connection. Vulnerability means being seen without the filter, without the mask, without the performance. It's showing up in our most authentic form and saying, this is who I am, not who I think you want me to be. It's admitting when we're afraid, reaching out when we need help, telling the truth even when it shakes, and allowing others to witness us in our most human moments. It's uncomfortable, yes. It's terrifying often, but it's also transformational. Because when we drop the armor, when we stop hiding, we create the possibility for real, meaningful connection, not just with others, but with ourselves. We allow the parts of us that have been silenced to speak. We give our pain a name. We give our story a voice. And in doing so, we step into a new kind of power, not the power of domination or invincibility, but the power of presence, truth, and belonging. Think about the people who've moved you most in life, not the ones who had it all figured out, but the ones who dared to be real, the ones who stood on trembling legs and told their story anyway, the ones who admitted they didn't have the answers but kept showing up, the ones who cried in public, who forgave out loud, who loved even after heartbreak. That kind of honesty doesn't push people away. It draws them in. It invites others to step out of hiding. It says, you're not alone. I've been there too. But vulnerability is not just about sharing your story with others. It's also about telling the truth to yourself. It's about acknowledging the pain you've buried, the fears you've avoided, the grief you haven't fully felt. It's about sitting with discomfort instead of running from it, choosing honesty over denial, and allowing yourself to be exactly where you are without shame. That kind of self-awareness is fierce. It takes grit. It requires us to let go of who we think we should be and embrace who we are. And yet, we fight vulnerability with everything we have. We numb ourselves with distraction, scrolling, working, shopping, drinking, eating, striving. We avoid the silence because in silence, the truth becomes too loud. But here's the reality: numbing doesn't protect us from pain. It protects us from joy, from intimacy, from fully living. When we cut ourselves off from vulnerability, we also cut ourselves off from love, from creativity, from purpose. You can't selectively numb emotion. If you numb the sadness, you numb the joy too. Vulnerability isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily choice. It's saying yes to the discomfort of growth. It's choosing to speak the hard truth in a difficult conversation. It's showing up to a new relationship after a heartbreak. It's taking a risk when failure is possible. It's raising your hand when you're unsure, saying, I don't know, when you're expected to be confident, and being honest about your limits when everyone else is pretending they have none. It's about leading with your heart, even when it feels exposed. There's a myth that vulnerability means oversharing or spilling everything. That's not it. Vulnerability is not about being unfiltered. It's about being intentional. It's about showing up in alignment with your values, with integrity and honesty. It's not about being weak. It's about being real. And realness, in a world full of fuckheads, is strength. It's the kind of strength that can't be measured in muscles or medals, but in the depth of your presence and the authenticity of your relationships. The truth is, being vulnerable won't guarantee you won't get hurt. In fact, you probably will. Vulnerability opens the door to pain, rejection, failure, but it also opens the door to healing, to love, to true transformation. And in the long run, it's not the wounds that define us. It's how open we're willing to be as we heal them. Vulnerability lets us move from surviving to thriving. It's how we turn our pain into power and our struggles into stories of resilience. You don't have to be fearless to be vulnerable. You just have to be willing to show up, to take the risk, to live with your whole heart. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. And in a world that's constantly telling us to be more, do more, prove more, the boldest thing you can do is to show up as you are without apology. Because the moment you choose to stop performing and start being, you reclaim your voice, your worth, your power. And that is the kind of courage that changes everything. We are a culture conditioned to avoid pain at all costs. We label difficult emotions as dangerous, weakness as failure, and discomfort as something to be escaped instead of embraced. From a young age, we are taught that if we're sad, we should cheer up. If we're scared, we should push through. If we're overwhelmed, we should toughen up. As a result, we begin to internalize a belief that feeling too much is somehow wrong, that we are broken if we are tender, that we are failing if we are hurting. But the truth is, emotions are not problems to be solved. They are messages to be heard. When we experience something painful, our instinct is often to numb. We distract ourselves with overwork, overspending, overeating, overcommitting, anything that can mute the noise of our inner world. We scroll mindlessly through screens, keep ourselves busy to avoid stillness, surround ourselves with noise so we don't have to face what's real. And while numbing may offer temporary relief, it is not healing. It is avoidance. And avoidance robs us of the depth, the insight, and the strength that comes only from being fully present with our pain. Pain has a purpose. It speaks to us in a language our minds don't always understand, but our hearts recognize. It tells us when something matters, when something is broken, when something inside us needs our attention. It's not there to destroy us, it's there to awaken us, but only if we're willing to feel it. The very emotions we are most afraid to face, grief, fear, sadness, disappointment, are often the ones that hold the keys to our growth. They peel back the layers of our false self and invite us into a deeper knowing, a more honest life. Feeling everything isn't easy. It's raw and real and sometimes unbearably intense. It takes courage to sit with sorrow without trying to fix it, to feel anger without lashing out, to walk through anxiety without shutting down. But this is how we build emotional resilience. Not by avoiding our feelings, but by allowing them to move through us. Emotions, when felt fully, pass. They have a rhythm, a cycle, a wisdom. When we suppress them, they don't disappear. They just go underground. And anything that lives in the dark too long begins to grow in distorted ways. We carry so much unprocessed emotion in our bodies, uncried tears, unsaid truths, unfelt grief. These buried emotions don't just vanish with time. They show up in our relationships, in our health, in the way we speak to ourselves. They make us reactive instead of responsive. They steal our joy, our clarity, our ability to truly connect. And still, we keep running. We keep numbing. We keep pretending that if we just stay busy enough, the feelings will go away. But feelings don't disappear. They wait. They wait until we are quiet enough to hear them, brave enough to feel them, kind enough to tend to them. The invitation is not to drown in our emotions, but to honor them, to allow space for them, to stop judging them as good or bad, right or wrong, and instead see them for what they are, signals. Pain says, something needs your attention. Sadness says, something mattered and it's been lost. Anger says, a boundary has been crossed. Even fear, which so many of us try to avoid, says, there's something here worth protecting. If we stop numbing and start listening, we begin to develop emotional fluency. We learn to respond instead of react. We learn to make space for our feelings without letting them control us. One of the greatest acts of self-compassion is allowing yourself to feel fully, to give yourself permission to be human in a world that demands perfection, to cry without shame, to hurt without guilt, to acknowledge that your feelings are valid simply because they are yours. You don't need anyone else's permission to feel what you feel. You don't need to justify your pain or minimize your experience to make others comfortable. Your emotions are your own sacred terrain, and they are worthy of respect. There is also a sacredness to sitting with someone else's pain without trying to fix it. So often, we rush to offer solutions, platitudes, or advice when what's really needed is presence. When we are willing to feel our own emotions, we become safer people for others to feel with. We create space for authentic connection, not the kind built on pretending everything is okay, but the kind that says, I see you, I'm with you. You're not alone. That kind of connection is impossible without vulnerability, and vulnerability requires the ability to feel. True healing, true transformation begins when we stop running from ourselves. When we slow down enough to feel the ache and trace it back to its source. When we sit in the quiet with our pain and ask, what are you here to teach me? It won't always answer immediately. Sometimes it won't make sense right away. But over time, when we meet our emotions with curiosity instead of fear, they begin to soften. They begin to move. And in that movement, we find not only relief, but wisdom. To feel deeply is not a flaw. It is a gift. It is a sign of aliveness, of empathy, of being awake to the human experience. It takes immense strength to feel everything, especially in a world that tells us to shut down. But it is in that willingness to feel that we reclaim our power, our clarity, and our voice. We begin to walk through life not as numb observers, but as fully present participants. We begin to trust our hearts again, and that changes everything. There will be days when getting out of bed feels like a battle. Days when your chest feels heavy with emotions you can't quite name. Moments when your voice shakes, your hands tremble, and your faith in yourself feels almost invisible. On those days, the world doesn't stop to ask how you're doing. It keeps moving, rushing past as if nothing is wrong. And in those moments, it can feel like no one sees you, like the weight you're carrying is invisible, like the ground beneath your feet is too fragile to trust. And yet, even in that trembling, you have a choice. Not a loud, grand, fearless choice, a quiet, trembling one. You choose to rise. Courage is often misunderstood. We think of it as the big, bold act. The hero charging into battle, the leader making powerful decisions, the speaker commanding a stage. But courage more often looks like the ordinary act of showing up when everything in you wants to disappear. It's brushing your teeth through tears. It's taking a deep breath before walking into the room. It's answering the phone, going to the appointment, facing the conversation. Courage doesn't mean the fear is gone. It means the fear is there, and you move anyway. There is nothing glamorous about rising when you're shaking. It's messy, it's vulnerable, it's uncomfortable. But it's also the birthplace of strength that is real, earned, and enduring. The kind of strength that no title, paycheck, or praise can give you. The strength that's forged in the fire of real struggle. The strength that whispers, I've been through worse. I'm still here. When we wait for confidence to show up before we take action, we give our power away. Confidence doesn't magically appear. It's built, and it's built in the small, unseen moments when you act despite your doubt, when you speak up even when your voice quivers, when you reach out even after rejection, when you keep going even when you have no guarantees. These moments don't always feel triumphant at the time. In fact, they often feel terrifying. But later, when you look back, you realize they were pivotal. You realize those trembling steps were actually the strongest you've ever taken. We live in a culture that celebrates results, but overlooks the process, that worships resilience, but skips over the pain it costs. We are constantly bombarded with images of people thriving, smiling, achieving, all while hiding the reality of what it took to get there. The truth is, the strongest people you know have walked through moments of deep fear, doubt, and pain. What sets them apart isn't that they didn't struggle, it's that they didn't stop. They kept showing up, even when their hearts were broken, even when their hands were shaking. There's something powerful that happens when you stop trying to wait for perfect conditions and start moving through the storm as you are. You begin to discover an inner reserve of strength that you didn't know existed. You learn that it's possible to hold fear in one hand and faith in the other. You find out that even when your confidence is shattered, your commitment can still carry you forward. And you start to believe, not because everything suddenly gets easier, but because you've proven to yourself, again and again, that you are capable of doing hard things. You also start to understand that strength isn't about pretending to be okay when you're not. It's about being real about the pain and choosing to keep walking anyway. It's about honoring your humanity and still stepping into the next moment. The idea that bravery means fearlessness is a myth. True bravery is action taken in the absence of it. It's doing the next right thing while your knees are still wobbling and your heart is still racing. It's the breath you take when the anxiety rises. It's the words you speak even when your voice is tight. It's the step forward when everything inside you says to run back. And every time you do that, every single time, you change something inside yourself. You shift the way you see yourself. You start to believe that you are capable, not because you feel strong, but because you chose to be strong. And that choice, repeated over time, becomes your foundation. It becomes the way you carry yourself, the way you navigate difficulty, the way you stand up for what matters. It becomes the way you live your life. There's also grace in this process. Grace in realizing that courage doesn't look the same every day. Some days, it's big and bold. Other days, it's quiet and barely visible. But it's still courage. There's grace in knowing that it's okay to cry, to rest, to doubt, and still be brave. You don't lose your strength because you struggle. You don't lose your courage because you're scared. You don't lose your power because you feel overwhelmed. All of those things can exist alongside your determination. All of those things can be part of your rising. You don't have to roar to be powerful. Sometimes your power is in the whisper, in the gentle step, in the soft but steady movement forward, even when the path isn't clear, even when the outcome is uncertain, even when your entire body is shaking and your heart feels like it's breaking. Courage isn't loud. Courage is steady. It's the refusal to disappear. It's the choice to keep going. It's the belief that you're worthy of something more, even when everything in you is screaming to give up. And it's in those moments, those trembling, terrifying, tiny moments of choice, that true transformation begins. There's something profound about the way Wayne reshapes us, not just in the moment it happens, but in the slow, invisible process that follows. When we go through something that breaks us, whether it's a betrayal, a failure, a loss, or even the unraveling of a dream, we never come out the same. And maybe that's the point, because the goal is not to bounce back to who we were. The goal is to evolve into who we were always meant to be. You won't be the same person when you rise from what broke you. You'll be someone deeper, someone stronger, someone wiser, not despite the pain, but because of it. We live in a culture that glorifies the comeback, the triumphant return to normalcy, the glow up, the polished success story that erases the messes it took to get there. But healing doesn't always look like coming back the same. Sometimes it means letting go of everything you once thought defined you. It means shedding old versions of yourself who were rooted in survival, not authenticity. It means mourning what was while making room for what could be. Pain has a way of burning through our defenses. It strips us of our ego, our performance, our illusions. It reveals what's real. In the wreckage, we're forced to confront who we really are without the titles, the roles, the expectations. And in that rawness, we begin to see what really matters, what we actually believe, who we actually are. The version of you that comes out on the other side of heartbreak isn't just older. It's more rooted, more conscious, more whole. You don't return to the world with shallow strength. You return with the quiet power that comes from having faced the darkest parts of yourself and choosing to keep walking anyway. There is a beauty in the rebuilding, a slow, steady reclaiming of your soul. You begin to reassemble your life with intention rather than habit. You start saying no to things that drain you. You speak more honestly, more directly. You begin to prioritize your peace over your performance. You stop needing to prove yourself and start choosing to A/B yourself. You no longer chase validation because you already learned how to validate your own worth in silence. Pain gave you that clarity. It taught you what really matters and what never did. The process is not linear. You'll have moments where you feel like you're back to square one. You'll miss the old version of yourself, even if that version was exhausted and secure or pretending, because it was familiar. And there's comfort in the known, even when it's painful. But with time, you begin to notice that the new you doesn't bend as easily under pressure. You notice that you speak up instead of sitting silent, that you protect your boundaries rather than abandoning them, that you walk into rooms with a quiet confidence that doesn't need to be announced. You begin to understand that resilience isn't about being untouched by hardship. It's about being transformed by it, not hardened, but refined, not bitter, but boundaried, not invincible, but inwardly strong. You learn how to carry your story with grace, not shame. You become the person who knows how to sit with others in their pain because you've sat with your own. You develop empathy that isn't performative, it's lived. You know what it's like to be in the pit. And so when you climb out, you don't pretend it wasn't hard. You share the truth. You show the scars, not for attention, but for connection. Your new strength doesn't come from pretending you're fine. It comes from owning your process, from honoring your tears, from recognizing that the deepest transformation often begins with the deepest pain. We are taught to chase comfort, to aim for ease, to avoid risk, but the greatest parts of ourselves are often forged in adversity. We don't grow from things that are easy. We grow from what challenges us, stretches us, and yes, breaks us. And not all breaking is destruction. Some of it is creation, a clearing of what no longer serves, so something more honest can take its place. The person you become after the fall is someone who no longer settles, who no longer tolerates what drains, who no longer abandons themselves for the sake of peace. You begin to live with more integrity. You're more aligned with your values. You start showing up in rooms without shrinking. You trust your voice. You trust your gut. You stop asking for permission to take up space. You stop explaining your worth. You stop watering yourself down to make yours comfortable. It's not always easy. In fact, most of the time it's exhausting. Growth can feel like grief, because you're letting go of identities, beliefs, and attachments that were once part of your pure foundation. But in the letting go, there's also liberation. You stop living a life based on who you were expected to be and start building a life based on who you really are. You find a kind of peace that doesn't rely on circumstances, a kind of joy that isn't performative, a kind of freedom that comes from within. You don't emerge from the fire unchanged, emerge clearer, fiercer, more rooted. Your softness becomes sacred, not a weakness. Your openness becomes intentional, not naive. You walk with a wisdom that can only come from walking through the dark and refusing to let it define you. The version of you that rises is not a replica of who you were before. It's a new creation, one that knows loss but chooses love, one that knows fear but chooses faith, one that knows the cost of transformation and chooses it anyway. There's a moment after the healing begins when the worst of the pain has passed and you begin to breathe again, not easily but intentionally. It's in this quiet aftershock that something inside you shifts. You begin to look around, not just at the pieces of your own story, but at the stories of those around you. You start to see people differently. You notice their eyes, their silence, their subtle hesitations, the weight they carry in their shoulders, the any way they avoid certain conversations. You recognize things you never saw before because now you understand. You've lived through it. You've felt the ground collapse beneath you. You know what it's like to put yourself back together in the dark. And because of that, something profound is born in you. Compassion that isn't theoretical, but embodied. When you come out the other side of your own pain, you have a choice. You can pretend it never happened. You can hide it, mask it, bury it under success and smiles and tell the world you're fine. Or you can choose something braver to share, to own it, to allow your journey to be a lantern for others still wandering in their own darkness. It doesn't mean you stand on a stand or shout your story to the world. It doesn't require grand gestures or public declarations. Sometimes it looks like a quiet conversation, a hand on a shoulder, a message that simply says, I see you. I've been there. Your vulnerability becomes a lifeline for others when you stop seeing it as a flaw and start seeing it as a bridge between hearts that have both been cracked open by life. Because there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy watches from a distance. Empathy says, I know that place. I remember how it felt. That kind of connection is rare and it's priceless. It doesn't come from books or theories or ideas. It comes from lived experience. And that experience, when owned with honesty and grace, becomes a force for healing. Not just for you, but for others. We often underestimate the power of our own story. We think it has to be finished, polished, inspiring, tied up in a bow before it's sharing. The truth is the story is powerful, because it's real, because it's raw, because it includes the messy middle, the unanswered questions, the parts where you didn't know if you'd make it through. Those are the moments people relate to. Not the victory lap, but the stumble. Not the perfect ending, but the courageous continuation. Your story, exactly as it is, can be the mirror someone needs to see their own strength reflected back at them. And when you allow yourself to be seen in this way, Honestly, vulnerably, courageously, you create safety for others do the same. You become a safe space not because you have it all together, but because you're not pretending to. There is a unique comfort in the presence of someone who has walked through fire and no longer fears the flames. Someone who knows what it means to break, to rebuild, to carry scars with dignity. When you show up like that, you give others permission to exhale, to let down their guard, to tell this kind of leadership. Leadership through presence, through truth, through example, is not loud or flashy. It's deeply human. It's built on connection, not control. It's rooted in authenticity, not image, and in a world that constantly tells us to hide our flaws, to toughen up to. Get over it. Choosing live and lead from your wounds instead of your ego is a revolutionary act. You begin to lead with your heart, not because it's never been hurt, but because you has and it's still open. That's the kind of strength that changes lives. Being the light for others doesn't mean you have to have all the answers. It doesn't mean you've stopped hurting or that you don't struggle anymore. It simply means you've learned how to keep going with grace. It means you've learned how to hold space for pain, for uncertainty, for hope. And when you offer that space to someone else, when you say, "Me too," or "You're not alone," or "I understand," you do something powerful. You make healing contagious. You make courage accessible. You make the hard parts of life feel less isolating. There's also something incredibly healing about turning your pain into purpose. It doesn't erase the hurt or justify the worn zip, but it transforms it. It gives it a place to belong. It turns what once felt senseless into something meaningful. Your story becomes more than a burden. It becomes a gift that allows others to find their footing, a gift that says, you can make it too. And sometimes that's all someone needs to hear. The beauty of rising strong is not just in your own restoration. It's in your ability to help others rise too, to speak life into someone else's darkness, to sit with someone in their storm and simply be there, to share your journey, not to impress or convince, but to connect. That's what changes the atmosphere. That's what builds community. That's what heals not only individuals, but entire cultures. Truth-telling, stories of sharing, heart-led people willing to be real. You become the evidence that healing is possible, that strength and softness can coexist, that it's okay to struggle and still show up, that we don't have to be perfect to be powerful. We just have to be present. Every time you show up with honesty, you challenge the lie that we have to suffer in silence. Every time you hold space for someone else's story, you honor the sacredness of their pain. Every time you lead with vulnerability, you make it safer for others to do the same.